So, the entire planet has been overrun by an army of terrifying nocturnal creatures who only want one thing: to hunt you down for sport. When every night at sundown means they're coming back for more, what would you do? These things will tear you to shreds if they get inside, and Nicolas Cage is the only man who can stop them. We're here to break down the mistakes made, what you probably should do, and how to beat the alien apocalypse in Arcadian. The world as we know it is about to end, but this time it won't be the humans who caused it. Somewhere on the outskirts of a destroyed city, this middle-aged guy Paul is desperately scavenging for supplies. Off in the distance, he hears sirens, gunfire, screaming crowds of people, and even explosions from rockets. But he quickly cuts a path back away from the chaos and makes his way far out into the countryside instead. Miles away, the man eventually stops at a small shelter built directly into the hillside, returning just as a pair of his infant twins starts to wake up. It isn't clear what happened or how they got here, but it looks like they'll be lucky just to survive even one more night. 15 years later, Paul here is starting to look like an old man, and the twins have grown up into his teenage sons, Joseph and Thomas. Thomas is more of the adventurous type compared to his brother, who likes to play it safe, and tonight he's cutting it close as he races the sunset back towards the farm. Just when Paul is starting to get worried, he sees the boy running towards them over the top of the hill, and they both rush back to the house, where Joey is already in the process of locking everything down. Working their way up from the first floor, they carefully barricade all of the doors and windows with thick wooden shutters until it's impossible for anyone to see in or out. Once the place is secured, they settle down for dinner in their safe room upstairs, where Paul warns Thomas that he won't be allowed beyond the property if he's late again. Sometime later that night, the boys have just sat down for a game of chess when their dog starts alerting them to something down on the first floor. They know that this means trouble, so Thomas grabs a lantern and goes to check it out, while his father follows close behind him with a baseball bat. As soon as he gets to the front door, whatever's out there starts bashing on the other side like a wild animal desperately trying to get in, and the two of them have to use their bodies to hold up the reinforcements so that it won't break through. The attack suddenly stops for a second, only to start up again even more intensely a moment later. But the door still holds, and the creature hits it with one last strike before silently disappearing into the darkness. Back upstairs, Joey points out something interesting. While they were holding the door, he kept track of the length of the attacks, and the pattern might not be as random as it seemed. The first attack lasted 10 seconds, the second was double that, and the third was only for 1, indicating that the creature was first testing their defenses, then actually trying to break through, before finally striking the last time out of frustration. In the morning when they go to check out the door, they find it completely covered in deep, animal-like claw marks, as if the world's angriest grizzly bear had been trying to get through. And now, it's only a matter of hours before the creatures come back again. Okay, maybe it's just me, but these new neighbors don't seem very friendly. It looks like Paul and the boys have a pretty good survival plan locked down if they've been able to make it under these conditions for the last 15 years. But I've got a feeling that we're gonna have to deal with these guys sooner or later, so it might help for us to understand what we're up against. As our heroes have already seen, and we're about to find out soon enough, these creatures are the definition of nightmare fuel, and that makes them pretty hard to describe. Basically, they're like large demonic primates with long, slender arms and legs, and a strangely reptilian head. Part of their appearance was actually inspired by, and you'll never guess this one, Goofy. Yeah, this Goofy. And you know, I can actually see the resemblance. Besides being creepy, they're also incredibly strong, as we've just seen firsthand by what happened to their front door. The force that they would have needed to produce to leave those deep gouges in a reinforced door made of solid wood is exceptional. About 5,000 newtons per claw. Even a really determined human with a sturdy axe would have to chop like crazy to do that kind of damage. The closest comparison that exists here in the real world would probably be a grizzly bear, which has extremely powerful forelimbs and claws used for digging, climbing, and tearing apart logs, and even breaking down cabin doors in search of food. As powerful as they are, the average grizzly only exerts a force of about 3,000 newtons per swipe, meaning that these creatures are almost twice as strong. They're also incredibly fast and agile, and have even more strange adaptations that are unlike anything that we see in the natural world. But that's not even the scariest part, because based on Joey's observations, they seem to possess a near human level of intelligence, allowing them to even plan out their attacks. The creatures are strictly nocturnal, only coming out at night to hunt. During the day, they live in a complex system of tunnels underground that's lined with some kind of black mold-like substance. They're too many and too strong to get rid of, especially now that society has collapsed, and even though their fortifications have been holding up so far, it's most likely only a matter of time before they find a weakness and get in. A good strategy would be to avoid them ever knowing that you were there in the first place, which brings up an important question. How did they figure out that Paul and the boys were inside? Eyesight is a crucial component of many predators' hunting strategies, but since these creatures are nocturnal and live underground, it's more likely that they rely on other senses to find their prey. One possibility could be a highly developed sense of smell, allowing them to detect a potential meal even through the walls of the house. To counter this, the family could place items with strong scents like certain herbs or household chemicals near any entrances to the house, which should help to mask their own smell and possibly even overwhelm the creature's senses to drive them away. On the flip side, they could place decaying meat, or, I hate to say it, even their own number 2 at the far edges of the property, which could lead the creatures away down a false trail or even possibly lure them into a trap. Besides smell, another potential strategy could be thermal detection, using specially developed organs to sense body heat. In that case, a possible solution could be to line the walls of the house with carpets, blankets, or foam insulation, which should help reduce our thermal signature, or use heat sources for traps. Given their nocturnal nature, it's possible that the creatures are highly sensitive to UV light, and we're able to track them down thanks to their old sweat, oils, and skin cells that leave behind UV reflective traces on surfaces like door handles and walls. Similar to smell and heat, less powerful UV lights could be used to lure them away from the farmhouse, and stronger lights might work to scare them off or even cause direct damage. Finally, they might be using electroreception, similar to how sharks can detect the weak electrical fields produced by their prey. For this, they'll want to gather metal mesh to turn their entire safe room into a makeshift Faraday cage, or use rubber lining on the walls to insulate their electrical signals. Figuring out how the creatures hunt would be a huge step in the right direction, but things are about to get a whole lot more complicated for the family here soon enough. With the door needing some repairs, Paul and the boys go out to gather some wood from the edge of their property. Thomas here is in a hurry to visit his friends at a nearby settlement called the Rose Farm, but Paul insists that he needs to stay and help with the daily chores before he can go. While Thomas is busy chopping firewood, Paul finds Joey in the garage, tinkering with some kind of secret project. It does take some convincing, but Joey finally explains that it's an off-road vehicle to help them with their work around the farm. The only problem is that he can't get it to start yet. Taking a look for himself, Paul makes a simple adjustment to the relays, and the engine roars to life. So the three of them decide to take a break from work for now and take this bad boy out for a spin. Things start off a little shaky, but after a few hours worth of driving lessons, Joey here is starting to feel a bit more confident behind the wheel of his new whip. When they get back to his house, Thomas immediately tries to take off to the Rose Farm, but Paul decides that the two boys need to go scavenge for more supplies down by the river, promising the kid that he can visit his friends tomorrow. With no other choice, Thomas hops back in the hoopty with his bro as they set off on their quest, but it isn't long before they start bickering again without their dad there to settle them down. Frustrated, he tells Joey to let him off as soon as they're out of eyesight, saying that he's going to the farm and will meet him back in that spot before sundown so they can go home together. But that was his biggest mistake. After running for a while through the forest, he eventually makes it to the edge of the farm, where an armed guard in a small watchtower waves for him to come in. As he's filling up a bucket at the water pump, he runs into the real reason why he was so dead set on coming all the way out there. The family's teenage daughter, Charlotte. She mentions that the chores for the day are already done, but says that her father could use his help with something else, playfully hiding the fact that she's really leading him to a spot in the fields where the two of them can hang out for a while in private. Meanwhile, Paul finishes up adding some reinforcements to the door back at their place, before deciding to kick it for a while down at a nearby waterfall. Although he's enjoying the peace and quiet for now, a noise from a strange black cave that's dug into the rocks across the creek reminds him that it's almost nightfall, and the creatures will be coming back again soon enough. As for Joey, he eventually arrives at the docks and carefully lowers himself down onto a crashed cargo ship, where he starts searching through the cabin for any useful supplies. There isn't much for him to find at first, but after searching for a while, he comes to a dark area that looks like it's been intentionally barricaded off. Not realizing the danger, Joey quickly pulls the barricade aside, only to be suddenly attacked by a massive swarm of flying cockroaches that forces him to retreat back out of the boat. While his dad and brother are both working hard to make sure that they survive another night, Thomas is back at the Rose Farm having a nice little date with his crush. She leads him to the tree where she used to play as a kid, and they decide to play a made-up game called Crappy Apocalypse, where the goal is to explain what happened when the world ended in faster than 10 seconds. Charlotte's version of the story is that an infection spread by insects somehow led to a robot uprising, while Thomas's involves some kind of bizarre event that turned everyone into werewolves. But from their explanations, it's clear that nobody really knows the true story. They notice that it's getting late, so Thomas promises to come back tomorrow and sets off towards home, never realizing that their lives are about to change forever. He takes off running back through the forest with only minutes left to spare. But this time, he ends up slipping on some loose stones that were intentionally set up as a trap by the creatures, and knocks himself out on a rock as he tumbles down to the bottom of a deep crevice, where the monsters are already waiting for him in the darkness below. Okay, well, I think we all saw that one coming. It looks like Thomas here forgot the most important rule of the apocalypse. Bros before the girl your age from the next farm over. 15 long years your father worked to make sure that you two brats got to remain in this mortal realm. But all that it took was 10 seconds of a woman's touch for you to throw everything in the gutter. Now old Joey gets to say, "I told you so," but you'll be lucky to even hear it because Thomas, my man, you f***ed up. It takes a special kind of stupid to know that there are creatures out there that will literally rip you to shreds if you're out past sundown, and yet still be cutting it close every single night. It'd be one thing if it was only your own life on the line, but you know damn well that every time you decide to do this, you're actively risking your father and brother's lives too. Leaving Joey out there to do that dangerous work all by himself is just messed up. And it's even more messed up that you two were supposed to be out there getting salvaged to protect the entire family. Your dad and brother were both risking life and limb to make sure that you had a safe place to sleep tonight. So you'd think that helping them out would be more important to you than getting to spend some time with your little crush. He even said that you could go tomorrow, and just think how impressed your girl would be when you pulled up in the only functioning whip in the entire apocalypse. All that you had to do was wait 24 hours, but now you'll be lucky to ever see any of them again, and they're probably going to end up getting killed just trying to save your sorry ass. Accidents happen, but f***ups are a different story, and you, Thomas, sir, have definitely f***ed up. Now, obviously, Paul and Joey aren't going to just leave Thomas here to fend for himself, even if he does kinda deserve it. But blindly running out after him is a good way for everyone to end up dead. If they're going to find him, then they're going to need to cover a lot of ground, and that's where the family dog Rocco comes into play. I'm not sure exactly what breed he is, but based on his appearance, he seems like he'd fit into the category of herding dogs, which includes the breed that's everyone's best friend in the apocalypse, the German Shepherd. In the non-apocalypse, these dogs are often used by law enforcement and search and rescue teams for their incredible ability to locate missing people by tracking their scent. This is thanks to their amazing sense of smell, with their specially evolved noses possessing 225 million olfactory receptors, compared to the average human who only has about 5 million. They can detect scents at concentrations nearly 100 million times lower than what humans can, and can even identify individual scent particles like picking a single grain of sand out of a bucket, making their sense of smell in total about 100,000 times more powerful than ours. To get Rocco to work his magic, they'd first need to present him with something that has Thomas's scent on it, like an article of clothing. Then all that's left to do is tell him to go find Tommy and follow his lead. He may not have years of training, but hopefully he can channel the powers of his ancestors and come in clutch when he senses the urgency of the situation. Now, as for gear, Paul needs a weapon that's right in the sweet spot between solid power and good reach to give him the best possible chance against these creatures. I'd go with a shovel, an axe, a machete, or even a homemade spear if he can quickly put one together, since those would allow him to get in some strong hits while still maintaining a bit of distance. The torch that he has to light the way also doubles as a weapon, so I'd try to bring as many of those with me as I could carry. Last but not least, he has their new UTV. This thing allows him to cover ground quickly and could be extremely helpful if Thomas is injured, but it also makes a lot of noise that's guaranteed to draw in the creatures. So whether or not he should use it depends on whether he thinks the potential benefits outweigh the risks. When Joey arrives at the meeting spot, he's worried to see that Thomas isn't showing up. After waiting for a minute, he quickly takes off back towards the house, where a worried Paul rushes out to meet him. Joey nervously explains what happened, afraid that he might get in trouble for letting his brother go. But Paul reassures him that it's not his fault, telling the kid to keep watch over the house and promising that he'll be back with Thomas in the morning. On his way out, he stops to grab a large knife from their greenhouse, before setting off in the direction of the Rose farm, hoping to find his son before it's too late. It's already after dark when Thomas eventually wakes up at the bottom of the crevice, still a bit stunned from the fall, but otherwise unharmed. His only source of light is a small sparker that he uses to briefly illuminate the darkness as he starts trying to find his way back to the surface. But he's also making a lot of noise and drawing too much attention to himself. And that's when he hears the sound of rocks shifting somewhere behind him. All of a sudden, he turns around and finds himself face to face with the monster, a terrifying, demonic-looking creature with dark black fur and 6-inch long fingernails that's evilly grinning back at him from the shadows. Luckily, the creature can't get to him, but another one reaches down through a hole from up above and starts grabbing him by the head as he desperately tries to escape. Just when it looks like he's done for, Paul rushes to the source of the noise and manages to take a second creature out with his knife after a quick battle, yelling down for Thomas to hang tight while he finds a way to get to him. He's expecting to be in some serious trouble, but instead, Paul only gives the boy a big hug and asks him if he's alright. They're safe, at least for now, but trying to find their way home this late at night would be much too risky, so they decide to hole up here in the cave and wait until daylight to make their next move. Back at the house, Joey looks like he's fast asleep in a chair when the creature from the night before returns for another try at getting in. This time, instead of trying to break down the door, it quietly checks every window until it finds a latch that it manages to slide open, and reaches in with one of its long, slender arms towards Joey, who's still completely unaware of the danger. Unfolding itself in a bizarre alien-like fashion, it slowly extends a razor-sharp fingernail towards him that rapidly grows to reach almost across the entire room, but stops just a few inches from the boy's neck. Unable to reach him that way, the creature opens the rest of the window and slides its entire body into the house. But just when it's about to grab him, Joey suddenly springs awake, dropping a cage down on top of the creature that captures it alive like he'd been planning all along. A little while later, Thomas and Paul are still in the cave when they hear a group of the creatures starting to gather around outside. Using a flare, Paul gets to look at one of them as it scuttles away into the shadows, but almost loses his arm when a second one takes a swing at him from its hiding spot just to the side of the entrance. Suddenly, the ground below their feet begins to vibrate as the creatures start trying to burrow in from underneath the cave, and Thomas realizes that they've rolled a large boulder in front of the exit to stop the two of them from escaping. With only seconds left until they break through, Paul orders Thomas to step back as he grabs a makeshift explosive device from out of his bag and jams it into the tunnel before manually puncturing the can to trigger a huge explosion. The blast is so powerful that Paul is badly injured in the process, but it forces the creatures to retreat until daylight, saving both of their lives for now. In the morning, Joey wakes up with still no sign of them, so he hops on the cart and drives down to the trail in search of Paul and his brother. Out in the woods, Thomas has to dig his own way out of the cave, all while dragging his unconscious father behind him, and finally makes it back out to the surface after a long struggle. The family's dog, Rocco, goes off on his own through the forest, where he eventually finds Joey and leads him back to the others. He finds Thomas huddled over their father in the path, not much farther up ahead, and quickly uses the skills that he's learned from his books to get him patched up as best as he can, before loading him into the cart with his brother's help and racing them all the way back to the house. Okay, this is not good. We've got Dad down, and now it looks like these boys are going to have to learn some emergency first aid. Let's start by assessing his injuries. He's unconscious, indicating a potential concussion or other brain injury. And the burns, cuts, and wounds all over his body need treatment right away to prevent infection. When they get him back to the house, the first thing that they need to do is lay him down sideways in the recovery position to keep his airway clear. Next, they'll want to apply cool water to his burns for about 10 to 20 minutes, and then use any clean cloth that they have like sheets or pillowcases to cover them. For any cuts, they need to rinse them with clean water and then apply either a pre-apocalypse or homemade antiseptic to minimize the chances of an infection setting in. After that, all that's left to do is get him on a schedule of pain meds, if they have any, keep him hydrated, and regularly change his bandages while monitoring him for any signs of infection. If they take care of him as best as they can, then he should hopefully be able to get back on his feet in a few months' time. But there's still an even bigger problem out there that we need to be worried about: the creatures. And now, after last night, they've learned how to burrow up from underground. To counter this, the boys need to reinforce their house's floor. Thick wood or metal should work as a temporary solution, but if they really want it to hold up, then they should try to use about 2 or 3 inches of solid concrete. They can use pre-made mix if they have some, or create their own by mixing limestone, sand, gravel, and water to make some the old-fashioned way. If this works, then they could also try digging a trench around the house and filling it with metal or concrete, basically like creating an underground fence. That's the plan for defense, but what if the boys wanted to take the fight to the creatures instead? It would definitely be risky, but not impossible if they decide it's their only choice. They already know where the creatures live, and that they only come out after dark, so if they go to their tunnels during the daylight hours, they might be able to catch them while they're sleeping and take out enough of them to significantly damage their numbers. For supplies, they'd need any of the same weapons that we mentioned before, plus maybe a few layers of thick work clothes for a little added protection against bites and scrapes. Besides just torches, I'd also bring as much flammable material as we could carry and use it for the main part of the plan. If we want to enter the tunnels at dawn, giving us as much daylight to work with as possible, then start by moving as quietly as possible and attempting to observe what the creatures are doing. Hopefully we can catch them sleeping and either find their nest or a place where there's a large concentration of them. That's when we use the flammable materials to create an explosion that we can set off from a safe distance, and take out as many of them as possible before they even know what happened. For extra points, we could even set traps at the exits to catch any stragglers when they try to escape. It might help to try and get some people from the Rose Farm to back them up on this, since it's mutually beneficial for them to get rid of the creatures too. They have high-powered weapons, access to medical supplies, and most importantly, they'd make for great meat shields if things took a turn for the worse. Plus, if they all end up getting killed, then we have 2 farms, so no matter what happens, it's a guaranteed win for us. After getting him back to the house, the boys carry their father upstairs to the bedroom and lay him down to get some rest. Thomas looks to Joey for reassurance that he'll be alright, but right now his brother says that there isn't much else that they can do for him. As they're thinking things over in the next room, Thomas finally notices the strange contraption covered up with a blanket that wasn't there the night before. Joey tries warning him not to touch it, explaining that he caught one of the creatures using a trap, but Thomas refuses to believe him until he has a look for himself. He's starting to get worried that the creatures might be getting smarter, saying that it only took this one only 8 minutes to find a way inside the house last night, but his brother says that they might not be as bad as they seem, lying that it was him who killed a bunch of them out in the woods. Seeing that his brother doesn't believe him, he says that he can kill the one in the cage just to prove a point. Joey dares him to do it, never thinking that he'd actually be dumb enough to try. But when he realizes that his brother is being completely serious, he steps in to try and stop him, only for them to accidentally knock open the cage in the middle of their fight. In an instant, the creature darts out of the cage and takes cover behind the bed in the corner of the room. The boys keep their distance as it slowly rises up to face them, with both sides waiting to see who's going to make the first move. When suddenly, their dog comes blasting in and charges straight for the creature, forcing it to leap across the top of the bed directly towards Thomas. It easily takes him to the ground, but Joey rushes in with a curb stomp and pins the creature to the floor using a wooden stick, buying his brother enough time to scramble back to his feet and brutally chop the monster's head off with an axe. They manage to win the fight, but Joey here is still frustrated. saying that he was going to study it so that they'd have a better idea about what they were up against. Now that the creature's dead, Joey decides that the next best thing is to drag it out to his workshop for an autopsy. As he cuts it open, he's surprised to find that the creature's internal structures are remarkably similar to our own, only even bigger and somehow more disgusting. While he's busy working, Thomas comes along and suggests that they should take Paul to the Rose Farm and get him some medicine. Joey here doesn't think that they're going to be willing to help, but after some convincing from his brother, they eventually agree to load him up in the cart and try their luck. Just like Joey predicted, before they can even say a word, the guard jumps down from his tower and shuts the gate in their path, blocking them from getting in. While Joey hangs back, Thomas rushes over to explain the situation. But Charlie's parents refuse to do anything to help them, saying that they don't have the room or the supplies to take in someone so injured. All that these assholes are willing to do is let Thomas stay since he's been macking on their daughter. But as for Joey and his dad, they say that they're on their own. Without saying a word, Joey turns and starts walking back to the cart, convinced that his brother is going to choose to stay. Thomas runs to catch up with him, but he turns around and says that maybe splitting up is for the best, blaming his brother for what ended up happening to their dad. The argument quickly turns into a full-blown fistfight, with Thomas nearly choking his brother to death out of guilt and anger. But they break things up before it goes too far, and Joey takes off back towards the house with Paul, leaving his brother to live at the Rose Farm if that's what he'd rather do. Okay, damn, that was seriously messed up, even for the post-apocalypse. Given the circumstances, I can see why the Roses here chose to kick Paul and Joey to the curb, but if the brothers had actually thought the situation through instead of fighting, then they might have realized that there were still a few ways to potentially change their minds. One of the most important things in the apocalypse is bartering, either with currency like bottle caps or more commonly with whatever goods and services you can provide. After all, nobody wants to give food, shelter, and medicine away for free, which means that they won't be willing to help you out unless you can somehow prove that you're just as useful to them. The thing is, Joey here is actually extremely useful, just not marketing himself correctly. This kid pretty much single-handedly got that UTV up and running, and that thing would be a huge help with the work around the farm here. More importantly, if he's got the brains to figure that out, then having him around improve life on the settlement in all kinds of ways. He could upgrade their defenses and infrastructure, help them build more advanced weapons and armor, provide medical care, repair more vehicles, and even increase their food output with better farming, making him well worth the extra cost of 1 or 2 extra potatoes per day. Now with that being said, when the bartering doesn't work, you can always choose violence instead. Joey might not be able to take on an entire settlement full of armed guards on his own, but he can always lure the monsters over there and let them do the dirty work for him. As luck would have it, the UTV actually gives him the perfect vehicle to do just that. The biggest concern is if it's going to be fast enough to outrun the creatures. One of the most popular UTVs in the US, the Polaris Ranger, has a top speed of about 60 miles per hour, with other styles ranging from about 25 to 50. So even if it's on the lower end, that should be more than enough speed to keep him at a safe distance away. And if he wants to get it going even faster, then a smart guy like him should be able to get that speed up by making a few small tweaks under the hood. If I were Joey, I'd wait until nightfall, then make as much noise as possible to lead a huge crowd of the creatures over to the Rose Farm. Then all that's left to do is let them ransack the place, and then come back for the medicine and everything else useful in the morning once the creatures go back to sleep and they're all dead. Thomas here is kind of looking like a douchebag in front of everyone at this point, but the Roses still welcome him in and tell Charlotte to show him to his new room. She brings him in and cooks him a better meal than he's probably had in his entire life, but Thomas can barely keep up an appetite after everything that's just gone down. Almost getting his dad killed and leaving his own twin brother out there for dead apparently isn't enough of a vibe killer to stop him for going in for a little smooch once they're up in his room. Charlotte's father abruptly bursts in and catches them in the act, and from the way that he tells her to wait out in the hall, Thomas can tell that he is not happy. Meanwhile, back at the house, Joey returns to find signs of trouble all over the property. Somehow it looks like the creatures have been getting closer, even in the middle of the day, so after getting his father back inside, he starts searching all around the house for where they could be breaking through. Checking the garage and the yard all turns up nothing, but he returns to the house itself and almost falls through a hole hidden under a rug in the kitchen. This means that their defenses defenses are basically useless. And with sunset quickly approaching, Joey decides to start setting the place up to make their last stand. Feeling guilty, Thomas eventually starts searching through the house for some medicine, with a plan to steal it and bring it back to his family before dark. Charlotte ends up catching him in the act, but instead of ratting him out, she quietly turns around and grabs the medicine out of its hiding place, telling him to be careful as he promises to come back as soon as he can. He almost makes it off of the property, but just as he's about to pass the gate, one of the guards catches him and orders the kid to freeze. Caught red-handed, he's left with no choice to do what the man says, following him to a nearby barn where they tie him up for his punishment. They're about to blast his feet off for stealing, when all of a sudden, a hole opens up in the floor as the man abruptly disappears below the ground, and dozens of the creatures start to spill out of it, throwing the entire barn into chaos. Hearing the commotion, Charlotte's parents wake up back in the main house and decide that they'd better check it out. But before he can even make it to the bedroom door, the father is suddenly tackled by one of the creatures, dropping a lit candle that instantly causes the curtains to go up in flames. It turns its attention towards the wife next, but when her husband tries to stop it, the creature leaps back on top of him and brutally finishes him off. Terrified, the wife runs out to the hallway where another one of the creatures ambushes her. This time, it pins the woman down as it snaps its jaws open and shut at an uncanny rate of speed, before a strange, facehugger-like appendage suddenly explodes out of its chest and completely engulfs her. When Charlotte finally works up the courage to leave her room, she finds the creature huddled over the bathtub with her mother trapped inside of a bizarre, fleshy sack. The creature itself growls up at her, but luckily it can't move in this state, and she's so terrified that all she can do is scream as she runs for her life out of the house. Back in the barn, Thomas finally manages to get free as the creatures start tearing through the place, effortlessly ripping all of the guards to shreds. He's about to run for it until one of the creatures cuts him off, but at the last second, a shotgun blast to the head takes it out and saves his life. It's Charlotte, and the two of them decide to head back to his family's house, as the entire farm goes up in flames. Okay, it looks like going back to the farm just became their only choice, but they're making a big mistake by not first taking some of the weapons. These guys were armed to the teeth, and Charlotte could easily cover Thomas while he at least grabs a weapon for himself, and maybe even one for his brother and his dad, plus some extra ammo. They might think that it would be too risky to start scavenging with the creatures still tearing the place up, but there's something that I noticed about their attack patterns that might change things up just a little bit. It seems like the creatures are more attracted to people who are actively running away. In the house, they attacked Charlotte's mom and dad, but never investigated her room where she was quietly hiding out. Same story for the boys in the barn. The creatures went for the fleeing guards before turning on Thomas, even though he was trapped in one place and therefore a much easier target. This could be like how hikers are advised not to run if they encounter a predator like a bear or a mountain lion in the wild, since doing so can trigger the animal's prey drive. In the wild, rapidly fleeing is a sign of vulnerability and kicks on the predator's natural instincts to chase you down. Instead, Charlotte and Thomas can counter this by moving slowly and quietly, and if they're confronted, trying to remain calm and stand their ground. While the creatures are busy here, this will at least give them some time to get back at the house. Besides gathering up weapons, they'll want to quickly reinforce the floors with wood or metal to prevent them from burrowing through like we mentioned before. They could try the old bunker from the very beginning that's still up on the hillside above the house if they need a fallback point. But they're about to find out that Joey already has a plan that's so crazy that it just might work. Over at the crib, Joey starts hearing some concerning noises coming from the window, but when he goes to check it out, he realizes that it's just Thomas and his girl. After quickly letting them in, Thomas hands over the medicine and apologizes for what happened, and the two of them decide that it's better if they work together instead of fighting. At the same time, Paul wakes up in the other room, and when Joey explains that the creatures are coming through the floor, he tells them that their only option is to stand and fight. Joey leading the way, they head out to the shed and start gathering supplies as fast as they can, setting up traps and fortifications all around the house. Thomas and Charlotte take the first floor, while Joey uses the last 10 minutes to put together some kind of grand finale upstairs. And not a moment too soon either, because just then, the kitchen floor starts to cave in as the monsters get ready to make their attack. What they don't realize is that another creature is already working its way down the chimney into the room where Paul is still lying injured. But that was its biggest mistake. The attack starts off slowly as the first creature carefully makes its way into the first floor, but Thomas takes it down with his knife as Charlotte blows another one's head off when it tries to lean in through the doorway. They're quickly overwhelmed and forced to retreat upstairs before more show up, but Joey says that the creatures getting in is all a part of the plan. As they enter their father's room, Paul staggers out, having won his fight against the creature, and grabs the shotgun from Charlie as he prepares to hold them off. He quickly manages to take two out by firing down through the floor, but a swarm of them make their way up the stairs, and without any ammo left, he ends up having to keep them back with nothing but his baseball bat. After sending one in to test them out, the creatures rush towards him down the hallway, as one big group. But he kicks a dresser through the hole in the floor and sends all of them except for one tumbling back downstairs. The last one manages to dodge his strike, but when the boys rush in and take it down themselves, he realizes that they're finally ready to survive without him. As they retreat into the bedroom for the final part of the plan, Paul locks himself on the other side of the door, knowing that there isn't enough room for all of them to survive. With no other choice, Joey, Thomas, and Charlotte climb into a meat freezer just as a timed fuse that he set up finally reaches its end, setting off an explosion so large that it sends the entire freezer flying dozens of feet through the air. After climbing out somewhere in the yard, the kids quickly rush over to their vehicle and start to speed away, but the creatures aren't done with them yet, forming together into a massive, flaming wheel of bodies that starts rolling after them down the road. Charlotte fires into it with her last shot, but that still isn't enough, and without any ammo left, she takes one last desperate swing with the stock of the gun that somehow manages to break the wheel of creatures apart, saving their lives just at the last moment. Exhausted, they finally bring the cart to a stop, and when they look up into the night sky, they realize that it's their first time ever seeing the stars. In the morning, Thomas suggests that they can rebuild the farm, but Joey has a different idea. He wants to build something new and better, aiming for the future that their father would have wanted for them. After burying their parents on the hillside, they decide to set out in search of other pockets of civilization, hoping to one day start a new community where they can all live in peace. It's been a hell of a day, but in the end, everyone learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes the real apocalypse is the friends we make along the way. Arcadian. Wow. I actually went to go see this movie in the theaters, and I was laughing the entire way through. Not just because of the content of the film, but the production and everything. Nick Cage, I mean, goddamn, this movie, whew. Anyways, let me know down in the comments what you would have done to survive a situation just like this one. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like and subscribe, and check out the How to Beat playlist for more videos just like this one. I'm the guy. We'll see you in the next episode, and have a damn good day.